Exodus chapter 33 would be probably where you want to go. Exodus 33. Last time I spoke, we tried to consider Exodus 32, 33, and 34, and we weren't going to get through all that, and so this is part 2 of that message. Anyway, almost last night made it 3 parts, but I feel like it's not needed. So anyway, the title again is A Shocking Turn and a Remarkable Glory. A shocking turn and a remarkable glory. That's the title for these, that I'm giving these 3 chapters, 32, 33, and 34. At the beginning of this entire series of Exodus, I said that one of the main themes of the book of Exodus is the revelation of God. The Bible is a collection of writings, right, given to us by God through men across time. It was written down to be preserved and read and understood by people so that we might know God and so that we might know how to return to God. That we might know what stands between us and God and how God deals with that. How has He dealt with it? How has He made the necessary provisions for us to return to Him? That's the great story of the Bible. But in the part of the Bible which we call the book of Exodus, we read a portion of that story which occurred more than 1,000 years before God would send His Son as the true provision for sinners to return to Him and have fellowship with Him. Even though it would be such a long time until this would happen, more than 1,000 years, God was active in the world in the meantime to prepare the world for what He would do. Bit by bit, through His commandments, through His judgments, through His forgiveness, through His prophets, through His promises, through all of His activity, He would set the stage for His Son. One day, much later, in the fullness of time, God would act in His Son, Jesus, by dying on a cross as a substitute payment for sin and then rising from the dead into the very throne of heaven, where He would offer forgiveness to His people. But in order to ensure that His actions could be understood, down the road, God established a nation and a body of revelation, which we now call the Old Testament, to collect and pass on through history, to contain the truths about God and the history of God with man and what God and man and the world is all about. The book of Exodus is one of the most important parts of that collection of writings. Here we read about God fulfilling His promise to Abraham, spoken hundreds of years before, that He would deliver the descendants of Abraham from Egyptian slavery and into the land He had promised them. He would drive out the inhabitants of the land, who would make the descendants of Abraham into a great nation, and that blessing would come to the world through that nation, through some descendant there. That book of Exodus is the people of Israel's historical and religious account of that deliverance from Exodus. It's what God instructed them to write about this account. There are a number of remarkable truths about God which we learn along the way in this book. Certainly one of the most amazing things that we learn about God in this book is that He desires to redeem the people out of slavery, and not just into a land, but unto Himself. Out of slavery, unto Himself. Out of Egypt to Him, not just to Canaan. He condescends to take this nation of slaves as His own people and to undertake for them and to teach them and bless them with a knowledge of God, to make them a nation of royal priests. That amazing change for the people of Israel is on offer from God. Right? You could be no longer slaves in Egypt, but royal priests of God. Once He delivered His people from slavery in Egypt, He has provided for them in miraculous ways and eventually led them to this mountain where God makes a covenant with them, the terms of that covenant, He speaks to them Himself from the mountain in loud language. There were 10 rules given by God to the people, and then there was a covenant ceremony where the whole covenant was ratified with blood and oaths and a meal. And this covenant is to create a structure for the ongoing relationship between God and the people. It's like a contract. As the creator of heaven and earth, and as the one who delivered them from Egypt with a strong and mighty hand, he is their rightful ruler. That covenant arrangement has this basic document with 10 rules for the people. And beyond that, then, there are other laws that people must follow, as well as regulations for God's tabernacle and the service which will be rendered to him there, as he rules them not from afar, but from in their midst, to dwell with them. You see, God does not plan to just deliver them from their enslavers and then to somehow rule them from a faraway place, as some conquering but only visiting king. Rather, his offer and his intention is to make them his people, to dwell with them, to be not just their king, but even God in their midst, to be present with them, to bless them with his presence, and to set them apart from the rest of the world by his own peculiar involvement with them and his blessing of them. They would have a real knowledge of God and of his ways, and this would set them apart. In that context, then, the people of Israel have agreed to the 10 covenant terms and have sworn to keep the covenant of God and to obey him as their God and their king. So Moses then is commanded by God. He leaves the people to meet with God, up on the mountain, then where God writes the 10 words of the covenant on stone tablets to be kept as a testimony of the accepted terms of the covenant. While upon the mountain, God also instructs Moses about certain ceremonies the people will be required to keep, certain festivals and things. And he also gives him specific instructions about how to build a royal tent/religious shrine for God, who will manifest his presence among them in that place as they travel. So what happens? Well, having finished with those instructions to Moses, God stops giving any more instructions to Moses, because while Moses was with God on the mountain, a most shocking thing has happened among the people of Israel at the foot of the mountain. Right? Those same people who had promised to God that they would keep all the covenant terms have broken the covenant with God before they even received a written copy. Right? They haven't even got a written stone copy yet. Moses has still got these up on the mountain. While waiting for Moses to come down from the mountain, they broke the first 2 of the agreed commandments in a very bad way, right? They had made for themselves a golden calf as an idol and worshipped it and celebrated amongst themselves as if it was to this made-up God that they owed their allegiance. And so before they even received a written copy of the covenant, but after they had agreed to the very simple terms which God declared to them himself, and which they swore to obey, what do we find? They flatly disobeyed the covenant and find themselves now under the penalty of death. What happens next can be a bit confusing if you don't understand how to think about it. And Moses makes essentially 3 separate petitions for the people of Israel. And we looked at last time at the first 2 of those, but today we'll consider the third. But before we do that, I think it will be helpful for us to back up and think about these petitions and the way they work and what's going on here a little bit. One of the primary, I've taken us that far. Let me just back up now and approach this whole thing from another angle, help us to understand it a little differently. One of the primary things the Bible does for us is to teach us about God. And one of the most basic things we learn about God is that He's patient, He's kind, He's good, He's gracious. We also learn about absolute standards of right and wrong and a fierce judgment that God has when He exercises it. We learn that as the final judge of all the earth, He will do right, and He always does right. We learn all these things about Him. But the Bible can teach us these things in different ways. Right? The Bible can just tell us God is perfect, or it could show us that God is perfect by watching Him interact with people and the things that He does. And then we make the judgment ourselves. He is perfect. Right? Or the Bible can make the claim and then back it up by things that He's done to show us that He's perfect, to show us that He's good or gracious or kind or just. We can see all those things. So the Bible shows us these lessons in different ways. We also know some things about God, that He knows the end from the beginning, and that He has determined all things that come to pass in such a way that nothing is ever out of His control. We learn that He never overreacts or wrongly responds to anything in His creation, but always does exactly right. Whatever the winding path of history may take, however convoluted it might look one part of history might appear to you at one time or another, when we see it rightly, we recognize God's good, wise, and sovereign hand in directing the whole thing. So that is this picture of God in the Bible. But at the same time, we read of occasions in which it seems like, as we read the Bible, read of certain occasions where it seems like God is changing His mind on certain things. This God who knows the end from the beginning and never changes His mind on anything, He's determined from before the foundation of the world all things that will come to pass. We read where it seems like He changes His mind, or is learning information, or finding things out, or asking questions as if somehow He didn't know. But in those instances, God is not learning or changing, but often He's guiding us through a situation, teaching us to think about it as He does. And let me just give you an illustration for this to prove my point, and then we will consider another place in the Bible where this has already happened, though there are several. Imagine a child, let's say your child, has been wronged, and you want to teach them about forgiveness. How do you teach it to them? Do you just say, you must forgive? You must act to them as though they had never done that, and that's just what's required of you? You have to let it go? I mean, you could try that, and I suppose it might work, but it's not likely to work to just tell them to do this thing. It'd be very hard. Perhaps instead you could relate a story of a time when you were wronged, and you could fully describe how awful the thing that was done, how awful it was, the thing that was done to you, and how awful it made you feel, how angry it made you feel, and how justified you would have been to act in vengeance. And suppose you let that sink in for a few minutes. You just talked about that side of things with your child and compared it to what they had how they had been wronged. And they, at that moment of the conversation, they felt very good about going and getting vengeance because that's all you had talked about so far. And how justified, in many times, we could be to act in vengeance. Then you began to talk to the child about the need to forgive and the way that forgiveness is actually a higher course of action, more noble, more like God, to forgive the person and to no longer hold their action against them. Suppose you could do this in such a way that the child was almost in a rage when they heard how you had been wronged and how eager you felt maybe at one time for vengeance. The child was almost in a rage about it, but then was moved to tears when they heard about the idea of forgiving the offender. You could relate all this to the child in that way. Is that not a much more powerful lesson about forgiveness than merely commanding them to forgive? What is more likely to secure their action of forgiving others? This provides them also with a deeper understanding of how hard and how necessary and how much better it is to forgive. It's also more likely to make them realize how bad those offenses really were. When you spend some time kind of really justifying, vengeance here and the idea of justice, how much justice needs to be meted out, how bad the sin is. They understand that more. But then they also, having understood that more, now they see how much greater forgiveness is and what a great thing forgiveness is, how it's so difficult and so noble to forgive. So, we might say, glorious. Of course, this is a much more powerful lesson than just telling the child to forgive. You might remember then, in relation to this, in Genesis, that God judged Sodom and Gomorrah. But before He judged them, He visited Abraham and spoke with Abraham about the coming judgment. At first, Abraham was shocked about the judgment and its severity. But by the time the lesson was over, Abraham was convinced of the justice of God and of His perfect commitment to judge sinners and to deliver the righteous. He learned about the righteousness of God in all His ways. He learned about the severity of sin, the severity of judgment, and the exactness of God in judging even between different sins. Let's turn with me there just for a few moments, and I want to remind you of this. In Genesis chapter 18. Genesis chapter 18. I won't explain all the setting, but just briefly to say that Abraham is out here dwelling in tents. He's out there in the land, and these men come, and he doesn't know who they are, but he's really in obedience to God, seeking to be a blessing to those God sends his way, and he goes out there and goes out of his way to show them much hospitality, even by ancient Asian standards. And as the time had finished, he realizes that it has been God now that he's been speaking to, but the Bible still describes these men who we know are two angels or maybe three angels or two angels and an appearance of God as an angel or just an appearance of God. We don't really know, but the Bible will describe them as men or angels variously as they talk. But we pick up in chapter 18, verse 16. Moses is aware that this is God he's been speaking with in some way now. Verse 16, then the men set out from there and they looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to set them on their way. And the Lord said, and Abraham's there to hear it, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. So before God talks about what he's going to do, he just says, to these angels in a sense, he's like, you think I should tell Abraham what I'm about to do? Why we're here? After all, and he sets the stage for Abraham and for us, why would he show him anything? Because I've chosen him that he would command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he'd promised him. So God has some things he wants to do in Abraham's life and in the life of his descendants, but in order to make that happen, he needs to make sure Abraham learns certain things about righteousness and justice and the way God is, and so God wants to show him, rather than hide from him what he's going to do, he's going to show him and tell him all these things that he's getting ready to do, so that Abraham can understand it and understand God's actions in the world. Right? So he's not left ignorant and making the wrong conclusions about things. So what happens then, verse 22, verse 20, God then announces, then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. It's implied God is coming to bring judgment. This outcry has come out to heaven, in a sense, the way God's relating it, and he's going to come down there and investigate, and if they have indeed done those things, he's going to wipe that place out. That's the idea. Now, is God unaware of what's been happening there? Of course, God knows what's going on there. But he's relating this to Abraham so that Abraham can see God is the kind of judge that doesn't just, men judge in a way that they hear maybe a half-truth and they act wrongly on that. They judge wrongly. But God's not that way. He has a thorough knowledge of all the ins and outs and intricacies of a situation before he passes judgment. The judgment will be severe, but he takes keen interest in getting all the details accurately written down and recorded before a judgment is made. So the men turned from there and went down toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Abraham's pretty sure that God's heard a good report, a correct report, about Sodom and Gomorrah, that it's awful, it's wicked, they're going to be destroyed. That's probably that's going to happen. They deserve it. But what about people who don't participate? What if there's some who haven't done that? You're not going to sweep away the righteous with the wicked. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. So Abraham's thinking about it, and he's like, I know they're bad, but there are some people who probably haven't done that. And if there were 50 people that had stood against that, would you destroy it? Will you sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? If there are 50 righteous, would you maybe be willing to spare the whole town on the sake of those 50? And he says, far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Should not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Right? You shouldn't do that. So the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. I'm willing to do that. Abraham answered and said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. So now he's thinking, there were 50, but what if there just weren't quite 50? Right? What if there were 5 that were lacking? Would you spare the whole place, or what would you do? And God says, I would spare the whole place. And then, Abraham's thinking again. He says, what if there's just 40, right? And we can tend to reduce this down to this idea that Abraham's just kind of like trying to get it down to one or something. What if there were this many? What if there were this many? Like he's just trying to spare the place. He doesn't want to see just judgment come necessarily, but that's not what's going on. He's not, got a low bar. He's trying to, finagle God and negotiate and get it down lower. Rather, I think it's a fresh question every time. Like in other words, he's thinking about this and he's just dealing with this on a deep level. He says, okay, well, what if there were less than 40? What if there were only 30? I mean, that's not many people. What if there were 20? Well, what if there were 10? And God keeps saying, I would spare it for 10. And to keep, and in a sense, to cut the lesson off, to keep it from going any lower, notice it says, verse 32, then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So God just said, I wouldn't do it for 10, and walks off, or leaves in some way, went his way. However the Lord would do that, right? I don't know. But so this is what happened. And so Abraham went his way. And then if you go to chapter 19, verse 27, you'll notice, we'll skip over all this and we'll see what happens here. 19:27. Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of that land went up like the smoke of the furnace. So Abraham has this interaction with the Lord, and he goes his own way. He's thinking about it all through the night. Early in the morning, he is out there back to the place where he can see Sodom and Gomorrah to see what has become of them. And judgment had fallen. So this is all a lesson for Abraham. But what we see is Abraham asking these questions and kind of negotiating with God, and it's strange. But we need not be so confused. I'll say this, when you find great men like Abraham reduced to strange and repeated questions that sound like they're just not getting it, we should not, and when they seem slow to get the point, we should not assume that it's an example of the weakness and the stupidity of great men. We ought to assume, rather, it might well be a sign of how great the issue is that they're thinking through, how much they're having to rearrange in their brain and have new categories to think about when they encounter something like this. I think Abraham very likely, when he's confronted with this idea of God judging the sinners in Sodom, probably himself had thought, God's going to judge them eventually. They deserve it. And now God's coming and says, we're going to judge. And Abraham's thinking, oh, but there's some who are worse sinners. I mean, are they all going to be swept up like this in this judgment? No, and he's dealing with God on this. Well, for 50, that seems to Abraham initially like a reasonable number. So, well, if there's 50 people in that town who stood against it, then I don't think you should destroy the town. God says, I agree. And then Moses is thinking, more along the lines of, well, why would it be wrong to destroy it? Well, because the righteous shouldn't be, destroyed with the wicked. That's not right. And God's not going to do it for 50. I mean, what if there's a little less than that? Well, even for 45. Then he gets thinking, I mean, how many would God be willing to sweep away? I mean, it seems like 30 would be a lot of people to die, to suffer for that. And he keeps going down. Abraham is still thinking in terms of this whole collective group all being judged together. And he keeps whittling it down. For 10, God would spare the whole thing. Just note that God gave Abraham his word. If there are 10 righteous people in that city, I would spare the whole town. Even though they deserve my judgment, I would not judge them yet because there are 10 righteous there. God gave him his word. But God goes down there, and there's none who are righteous in an absolute sense, but there's one man who has righteous Lot, right, so-called righteous Lot, who already in Genesis has demonstrated he's not a righteous man, but he's more righteous than these are. He's certainly not partaken in the same sins of these people. And in the story of Genesis 19, he stands out as a rather righteous man, at least the first part of the chapter, trying to preserve these visiting angels from the harm that would come to them. What we find is that by the end of this whole thing, not only was God judging the sinners, but God spared, even though there was one righteous, he spared the righteous. God was able to bring severe judgment and preserve the righteous. And he's even able to distinguish between one form of sin and another, and what's worse and what's not. Lot was a sinner, but Lot didn't participate in that sin. They were judged for that sin. Lot was preserved. It's amazing. Like God was so exact in all of these things. And all this is a lesson for Abraham. Now, I just would say when we come to these situations where the person who's dealing with God is kind of fumbling through what they're saying and not sure what sense to make of it, we shouldn't just think, oh, that's so silly they don't understand. We should think, slow down, let's see how profound this lesson really is. And I think we find a very similar thing here in Exodus 32, 33, 34. So, back to Exodus. Last time we covered all of chapter 32 and a bit of 33. Essentially, we have in these three chapters 3 different intercessions made by Moses, made on behalf of the people. In the first instance, the first intercession, God had informed Moses of the people's sins because Moses had not witnessed it yet. He tells Moses he will destroy the people and make a new nation from Moses. That's amazing. Now, is this really what God meant to do? Well, no, it doesn't seem he meant to do that, but he was revealing something about himself in the process. Would he be right to do this? Would it be just for him to kill all these people? It would be just. They deserve it. They rightly under the penalty of death. Would it break any of God's promises? No, not technically. He could. Moses was a descendant of Abraham. He could start over from Moses and still have these descendants of Abraham into a nation. He could do all that. He could. He didn't threaten anything that would have been wrong for him to do. And yet, he didn't mean to do those things. He's trying to lead Moses down this path. Moses immediately intercedes for the people, seeking to cool the Lord's anger due to other considerations. Right? Okay? He says, don't let your anger burn hot, he says. And he gives them these arguments. And we find that in Exodus 32. I won't go to the verses, but I'll just summarize it. These other considerations are, first of all, God told him, Moses, your people who you brought up out of Egypt. And then Moses turns around and says to God, you mean your people who you brought out of Egypt, right? So it's like this first thing, God, they're your people, number one, they belong to you, not to me, so you should care for your people. 2, you've already done so much to deliver them and do them good. Like, don't reverse course now, you've already done so much for them. Number 3, why should the Egyptians say that you just brought them out here to kill them and do them harm? That would defame your great name among the Egyptians, right? And then number 4, you made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob about multiplying their offspring, and you did it in glowing terms, and this doesn't seem to fit that. What do I mean in glowing terms? Well, literally glowing terms. Your offspring will be multiplied. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven. Like literally, he spoke in glowing terms about what he was going to do. And this would not seem to fit. And what to say? The Lord relented. All right. So then Moses goes down to see for himself. And what happens? Now when Moses sees, now Moses, the one who was saying, God, don't let your anger burn hot. Now Moses' anger, it says, burns hot. It's incredible. What does he do? He has these covenant stones, right? The stones with the covenant written on it, and he breaks them. And don't think that is him breaking the covenant. That is him acknowledging the covenant had been broken. And as I said last time, culturally that's what you would do. You'd have this stone document, and as long as that stone document was in place, the covenant was in place. But once it was broken, whatever penalties are said to come to you, those come to you. And then because the covenant was broken, you break the stone, and it shows there's no longer a covenant agreement between us. There's no document requiring us to act a certain way one to another. And when Moses throws those things down, he's simply acknowledging this thing is over. And he throws them down and breaks them. It's almost a ceremony thing to do this. Now, what does Moses do then? He desecrates their golden calf, he grinds it to powder, throws it in their drinking water of the people, and makes them drink that. And then he calls to the people, who's on the Lord's side? And only Levites come to him. And as a result, Moses sends them into the camp with swords to kill indiscriminately. And it says about 3,000 people died that day. And the idea was to kill until, I think, why not kill them all, right? Kill until when? Until there's a change in the people, until there's a relenting from the people to say, okay, we're done with the thing. We've done wrong. Until this is acknowledged in a real way. Eventually the people are made to stop their madness and acknowledge their sin. Then Moses, in chapter 32, verse 30, the next day Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. okay, I'm going to go up there and talk to God again, and I'm hoping, so I don't know how, if there's some way we can cover this and fix this and see what can be done. Verse 31, so Moses returned to the Lord and said, alas, this people has sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now if you will forgive their sin, and he cuts off, because how could God forgive their sin? I mean, it was so bold. But he says, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you've written. So Moses is so faithful to the people of Israel to do what he can for them, that he knows that God had spoken already of starting over with Moses. And he says, God, please forgive these people. And if you don't start over with me. Condemn me too. I'm in it with them. And God did not agree to that. He did not agree to Moses' petition, but he did grant a stay of execution. You know, Moses was asking God to forgive them, but what does God say in verse 33? But the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out against my book, or of my book. You want to be blotted out? No, I'm going to blot out those who have sinned. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. So he's saying, I'm going to blot sinners out of my book. And they have sinned against me. But we're going to have a momentary stay in the execution. Go ahead and send them out, lead them to the place. I promised I'd send them there. I'll send my angel to go before them. I'm not going to go. But when I come visit them, know that I am going to come in judgment. And then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. So this is the answer he gets in the second intercession. And so then chapter 33, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying to your offspring, I will give it. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. When the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments, for the Lord had spoken to Moses, say to the people of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do with you. Therefore the people of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. So here's the idea. Moses comes down and reveals to the people what God had said. He's not coming with us. And he's sending us right now on. Now remember we had that message where we talked about all the tabernacle that was going to be built and all these things, and how this tabernacle was going to be built where God was going to dwell among them. God is now saying, I'm not going. So there will be a built tabernacle. There'll be none of that. You go. I'm not going. I'll send an angel. This isn't going to happen. God has not even at this point said, let's get in covenant with each other again. God just said, get out of here. Go there. I'll send an angel. I'm not coming. And when I come, I'm going to judge. For right now, take off your ornaments so that I may know, show me some sort of remorse that I might know what I should do with you. And the people take off their ornaments and they're there. This is what it looks like. And in that situation then, what has happened? We'll keep reading verses 7 through 11. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp. So it had been in their midst before, but now what happened? In order to signify God's displeasure with them, the tent was picked up, moved outside the camp, set afar, and out there is where Moses would go and meet with God. During this time, how long did this go on? We're not told exactly. And he called it the tent of meeting. It's out there far off from the camp. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up, and each would stand at his tent door and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. When all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, each at his own tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again and came back then into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. So here's Moses out there and his assistant Joshua. They go out there to be with God. And God has a word for the people, and he tells Moses what you need to say. And Moses goes. Where does Joshua, his assistant, go? He's like, I'm not going. I'm kind of good here with God. I don't need to go back with the people. You can go. So Moses goes, and he has a word to the people. And the people don't have access to God. God's out there. And there's this sense of reverence, right? Whenever God comes and the cloud comes down there, they rise and they worship. It's such a different picture than what they were doing before. And this is the situation. Now, out of that sort of an environment, one day comes what we read in verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you've not let me know whom you will send with me." This angel that you say is going to come, I mean, where is he? He's not showed up. He's not gone anywhere. We're just still kind of waiting around. You told us to take our ornaments off and be in mourning until you know what to do, and we've been here a while. What am I supposed to do? Yet, right? So you've done these things. Yet so you told me, you gave me a command, bring up this people. That's a big thing to have to do, but you've not shown me who you're going to send with me. And yet, it's also true that you have said to me, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. You've told me that I found favor in your sight. So I'm asking you, help me to do the commandment. Help me to do what you told me to do, to go take these people out there. We're just kind of left here without anything to do. Now, therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you, in order to find favor in your sight. Consider, too, that this nation is your people. So this is this third kind of section of intercession for Moses. And he's saying, look, we're here just waiting. Let me know who you're going to send with me, how you want me to go. You've told me that you really favor me, right? You've met with me in these ways. I get to see you. I found favor in your sight. So what I'm asking you now is show me what your will is so that I can do it and I can continue walking in your favor. I can continue pleasing you and walking in a way that you'd have me to do. And what does God say? My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. What? Now, just a minute ago, we just read about God saying, I'm not going to go up, and if I go up there, I'm going to kill him. And Moses is just saying, look, you've not let me know who you're going to send, what's going to happen. If I've found favor in your sight, if you've looked on me with grace and favor, then please show me your way. What will you do? And God says, well, actually, my plan is actually to go with you all. How can that be? How is that possible? And to give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. Right? If you're not going to bring us here, like you're saying you're going to come now, if your presence, not an angel, not somebody else, if you yourself aren't going to come with us, then don't even bring us up. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not the thing that sets us apart, that lets people know that we have God's favor, is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? What an answer, right? I mean, imagine how many people pray for the blessing of God in their life, and they mean money, a promotion, a nice house, a vacation, like whatever. They just make it easy. Moses is here saying, look, the thing that makes us distinct, that marks out the favor of God upon us, is you, God. When you come, when you're near, your presence, that's what we're after. And if you're not going to go with us, I don't care if you give us the land and give us all the things you promised, the milk and the honey and all this and freedom from our enemies. We need you. The thing that makes us different from everyone else is not that we have a good land, it's that we have God. Right? This is what he's saying. That's the heart God's been after. If he could just get that in the heart of the people, right? This is what he's after. He didn't call the people out of Egypt through the Exodus to the land, but to him and then with him to the land. This is what he's wanted. And God's saying, they've sinned against me in these ways. They've broken the covenant, but I'm going to go with them. I'm still going to go with them. I'm going to forgive them. Not only am I going to not kill them now, I'm actually going to go with them in the land, or into the land, and give them rest. If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, this very thing that you have spoken, I will do. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. And Moses said, please show me your glory. This is just Moses as a man, as a worshiper of God, as someone who's God has been speaking to face, who God is disclosing more and more about himself to Moses. And when Moses realizes that God is going to fully do what Moses has just asked, he's blown away. Show me your glory. How can this be? The people have sinned against you so greatly, and now you're going to come and you're going to forgive them and do all this again? And bless them in this way? Please show me your glory. And God said, I will make all my goodness pass before you and proclaim before you my name. He says, I'll show you. You want to know the glory of God? You want to know the great hidden things of God that have not been known by others? I will reveal them to you. I will make all my goodness pass before you and will proclaim before you my name. I will disclose who I am to you, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I'll be gracious, and I'll show mercy on whom I show mercy. Understand, Moses, the way this thing works is it's not that they deserve a second chance. The way this grace of God works is I'm just gracious to whoever I want. I'll be merciful and I'll be gracious when I want to. Like there's no earning it, there's no pleading, if we could just do, Moses said, if perhaps somehow I could make atonement, Lord, could you forgive their sins? And he's like, no, there's nothing we could do to make this right. And God just says, yeah, I'm going to forgive them. Yeah, I'll go with you. How? I'm merciful to whom I'm merciful. I'm gracious to whom I'm gracious. But he said, you cannot see my face. There are some things even then that I cannot yet show you. Right? For man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there's a place by me where you shall stand on the rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft on the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, but you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. What a thing. And what does the Lord say now? He's there on that tent of meeting. He says, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready by the morning, and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. And let no flocks or herds graze opposite that mountain that they could kind of see in. Like nobody gets to see. No one shall come up with you. Right? And let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds graze opposite the mountain. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and he rose early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai, as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. So now God said he's going to do this. Now it's happening. What's the report? The Lord passed before him and proclaimed. Now, you can be sure there was a visible manifestation of glory, but the thing that God wanted to reveal to him was not just that. It was what God proclaimed. What did God declare to him? He said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name. This is God's self-description, right? All this in our culture, it's all about how do you identify, right? Well, this is how God identifies. This is what he says. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and the 4th generation. That's God's self-identification. And it's all about mercy and justice and sin and righteousness. You see, this is the thing he's conveying. Faithfulness, keeping steadfast love, all these things. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshipped. And he said, if now I found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us. Please come not just with us, but in the midst of us. Why? For it is a stiff-necked people. And pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. Like he's finally bold enough now, before he's like, you've got to come with us. And God said, I'll go. Now when God reveals his full glory to him, or this measure of his glory to him, and tells him about it, Moses is so bold now. You see this bit about him showing steadfast love and forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin? Moses latched on to that, right? Because he also said, but who will by no means clear the guilty. But Moses is like, but I'm in it. I'm trying to plead with you about these people. And so Moses says, now, because all what you just said is true, And because these people qualify as needing forgiveness, because they're stiff-necked, I'm asking you to come with us in our midst because they're really bad. But you just got done saying you really do forgive iniquity. And so I'm asking you to really do that. Come in the midst of us. And not just that, make us your people. Take us as your inheritance. And he said, what does God say? Behold, we're going to make the covenant. I'm making a covenant. Before all your people I will do marvels, such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Take care lest you make a covenant. Now, this time when God gives these commands, he's giving cautions about what the kind of thing that just had happened. He said, take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, lest it become a snare in your midst. And you shall tear down their altars and break their pillars and cut down their Asherim, for you shall worship no other God. For the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and when they whore after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and you are invited, you eat of his sacrifice, and you take of their daughters for your sons, and their daughters whore after their gods, and make your sons whore after their gods. You shall not make for yourself any gods of cast metal. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. And he goes through that. Verse 19, this law of redemption is there. All that open the womb are mine, all your male livestock, the firstborn of cow and sheep, the firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with the lamb. And he goes through all these things with the sons. Verse 21, stuff about the Sabbath. 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. In plowing time and in harvest you shall rest. You shall observe the Feast of Weeks, the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. 3 times in the year all your males shall appear before the Lord, the God of Israel. For I will cast out nations before you and enlarge your borders. No one shall covet your land when you go up to appear before the Lord your God 3 times in the year. Don't worry about defending your land. Say, we've got this land, we're making war, we've been advancing and getting the land more and more. God wants us to leave home and hearth and everything and go to the tabernacle and go visit him and have these festivals. Who's going to keep us safe? No one's going to covet your land when you come. Don't worry. I'll keep you safe. He talks to him about offerings and sacrifices and these sorts of things. All these things he goes through again. And then we have in verse 27, and the Lord said to Moses, write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. So write all this down again. So he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate bread nor drank water, and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments, right? There's a question about, did Moses write those second 10 Commandments or did God? I think it's clearly that God did because God said he would write them on there again. Anyway, nonetheless, we have all of that. The idea is God just tells them again all the things about the covenant. It's not all listed here for us again, but this is the stuff that was written down that was going to be required for them to do. God basically, all this happens. Moses is going to come down now from the mountain with these 2 tablets again, as if nothing ever happened. Right? When this whole thing happened, Moses got the tablets, and then God says, oh, hang on, wait a minute. People have sinned. I'm going to kill them all. Right? This is how it goes. But by the end of this, Moses has got the tablets, and he realizes God is super gracious and merciful and forgiving and everything. He's got all this new knowledge of God, coming back down, ready to make the covenant. It's as if nothing happened, except what did happen was all this new knowledge about who God is and the way God's willing to forgive, how much he desires that, how serious sin is, but how much God is willing to forgive. It's incredible. Verse 29, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. Right? What glory. Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. Afterward, all the people of Israel came near, and he commanded them all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. So first, Moses was speaking with God. He comes down the mountain. Everyone sees his face shining. Moses calls to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. So Moses speaks to all the people and basically said, send your representatives, your leaders, your elders, come to me. Probably those same 70 elders who had met with God on the mountain before come, and they speak, and Moses speaks with them. And then they call all the congregation of Israel together, and Moses speaks with them. And when he's done, what does he do? He puts a veil over his face. Then we read this. Whenever Moses went in, this was an ongoing thing. Whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel what he was commanded, the people of Israel would see the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face was shining. And Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went in to speak with him again. That's chapter 34. So we've read now Exodus 32, 33, 34. We've come through all that stuff. And now the question really is, where are we at in the story? And what's next, right? So it's an incredible place that we're at, where God has agreed to dwell with the people again. Moses has been given these instructions about building this place. It's not been built yet, so that's yet to happen. People are going to make contributions. We're going to read all about those kinds of things. God told them earlier, leave this mountain. Well, they've not left, because now God said, all right, make a covenant, and now I'll remake the covenant with you, and now we're going to prepare, and before I go with you, we're going to build this tent, this tabernacle, and the place for me to dwell. All that has yet to come. We're going to end, by the time this is all done, with God inhabiting that place, fulfilling His promise, the glory of the Lord being there, and the people of Israel worshiping God, who's in their midst. And it's an incredible thing to think that God takes these people who, just a few chapters ago, certainly deserving of His wrath and and of death. We get that's Exodus 32. 8 chapters later, God is there. The place is built. God is in their midst, dwelling with them, as long as they can keep this thing going. And He's willing to remake the covenant with them. It's a wonderful thing. Now, we who know the rest of the story think, okay, yeah, God remade the covenant with him. If Moses was really thinking, he would have wanted different terms for a covenant, right? Because the people couldn't keep it, which makes us so thankful as new covenant believers that we have different terms. We don't relate to God and say, if you can just keep all these 10 things and all these other laws that I give and keep them perfectly, then you'll be my child. That's not how it works. But that is how it worked for them. The covenant was forfeit. They'd broken the covenant every time they sinned like this. And it's just a matter of whether God will graciously forgive them and go on and continue, or whether He won't. But they risk the whole thing every time they sin in these ways. It's incredible. It's amazing God forgave them at all. It's a remarkable act of forgiveness. It's stunning. It's one of the most remarkable events in all the Old Testament. An incredible vision of God, an incredible situation to see God do an about-face in all of this. But what it was God wanting to reveal to Moses what He's like, what He's willing to do, the kind of God that He is. So that's why I called, again, these 3 chapters, 32, 3, and 4, a shocking turn, that the people would turn away from God so quickly, but then also a remarkable glory. God's remarkable glory, that He's a God that forgives. Let's read one more time what He said. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and the 4th generations. We want to be as people who can hold these two things in tension, right? Just like God did here. He is gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, right? And that's this picture we get of God, right? That's what is the final day of God? When He comes to execute judgment and to deliver. He does both things. He keeps steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. No one makes it into heaven, makes it into the new heavens and new earth, apart from being forgiven of their sin, their transgression, their iniquity. And yet at the same time on that day, He by no means clears the guilty. The stage is set when you see these two things about God, that this is the primary tension within God that we're to understand. The stage is set for understanding the cross itself. That God would come and, yes, He would forgive His people's sins, but He would do it in a way that didn't skirt justice, but that rather endured the punishment that justice demanded. So justice could be carried out, so that as Paul says in Romans 3, God is both just and the justifier of he who has faith in Jesus. Right? He can be just and the justifier of sinners. Right? How is it God can just forgive Abraham and just say, there are sins that we've got recorded in Genesis, and God just doesn't treat him like a sinner and condemn him? On what basis does God deliver Lot out of Sodom? He's a sinner. He's not as bad, but he's certainly a wicked sinner. Why isn't he in hell? Why didn't he die there? Why does Abraham get to be a friend of God? Why is Moses treated so well? He didn't do everything perfectly. He's a murderer. What in the world? Well, in the times past, God had passed over these sins. But now what? Now he judged them in Christ. He's seen to be. We look at the cross and we see He is the justifier of wicked people at times. He does forgive sin and transgression and iniquity. But He's just. He even does that in a just way. No one can complain to God about injustice. It's an amazing thing. Well, that's all I have today. The thing about all these stories is they're all, in the Old Testament, they're always just partial stories. They're always just leading up to the bigger thing. And that's what we've got. But next time we will look at the rest of Exodus, like in a kind of a cursory way, and focus in on a couple passages next time I speak. And there'll be one more message on Exodus where we will just take the book as a whole and try to rightly take away the emphases that are there and the lessons that are there. Are there any questions or comments on anything that's been shared today?